what's up guys, it's Amir, Gaddy Trades here. I'm making this video on SMT divergence and I'm going to be covering three main things. So the first thing is what is SMT divergence and how to identify it in your charts. The second thing is a high probability SMT versus a low probability SMT. And then the third thing is the mistakes that I've made using SMT in my trades, and as well as mistakes I see other traders make when using SMT. So I don't want to waste any time. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're covering is what is SMT. So SMT divergence stands for Smart Money Tool Divergence. It's when a correlated pair or a correlated asset that's expected to move together or in tangent break their correlation. So this is a divergence. So these pairs are supposed to move the same. When they don't move the same, or in other words, when they break the correlation, it is signature of a reversal or a divergence. So how do you identify SMT on the charts? So a bearish SMT divergence is when one asset makes a higher high and the other one makes a lower high. And then for a bullish SMT divergence, it's when one pair makes a lower low and the other one makes a higher low. So I'm going to give you examples of both of these right now. So here we are, and I noted these two higher time frame key levels, so just note that. And this is asset 1, this is asset 2. So in this case, we have a bearish SMT divergence because, like we said earlier, one asset made a higher high and the other one made a lower high. So asset number 1 took out this high over here, making a higher high. Asset number 2 failed to take out that high and made a lower high. And in this case, with the bullish SMT, we show strength because in this asset number 1, we made a lower low. So we took out this low over here, made a lower low. And in asset number 2, you can see this low over here. We failed to take this low, which is showing strength. So in this case right here, this asset is weak and this asset is strong. And in this case right here, this asset is strong and this asset is weak. So how do we use this in our charts? So I'm going to give you guys an example of a high probability SMT divergence. So right here, you can see this higher low right here and this lower low right here. So asset number 1 made a higher low. Asset number 2 made a lower low because they're supposed to move in tangent. And we can see in this specific case at this specific time, they did not move in tangent. So I'm referring to Friday the 14th at 7 a.m. The NASDAQ on the left failed to take out this low and it made a higher low. And ES, or the S&P 500, did take out that low and made a lower low. Excuse me if you guys can hear that. Where were we? So we were talking about the SMT divergence in this specific case. You can see asset number 1 made a higher low and asset number 2 made a lower low. So going back to our diagram, that would be this instant right here. So asset number 1 would be the higher low, which is right here. Asset number 2 making the lower low. So what does this mean? The first thing it means is the asset that failed to take this low is showing strength, which is the NASDAQ on this case, and this asset is showing weakness. So that's number 1. 2, how do you use this when it comes to actual trading? So the way I identify a high probability SMT is with 2 things. So 1 is bias and 2 is key level. Those are the only things I use to look for a high probability SMT. So I'm not going to cover how I get my bias in this video, but this is Friday, June 14th, and I was bullish on this day, and I did take a trade based off this SMT that helped me increase the probability and the likelihood of that trade playing out. So the first, I think, to identify is the bias, and that was bullish. The second thing is the key level. And right here, I'm going to go on the 4-hour chart, and this is our key level. So this 4-hour fair value gap, 1, 2, 3 candle formation, leaving this fair value gap. On the 1-hour time frame, we have this nice SMT divergence inside the 4-hour fair value gap. Now this is crucial because we now have established a bullish bias, which is one thing that'll increase the probability of the SMT or the trade. The second thing is we have this bullish fair value gap on the 4-hour time frame that we're also expecting to hold price because we are bullish. So now when we see relative strength in one of the correlated assets inside that key level with our bias, we now have a very high probability trade idea to look for trades. And in this case, you would potentially drop to a lower time frame and look for your entry. But we're not discussing entries. And you can see in this instance, we ended up taking out the drawn liquidity, which is this high. And over here, we actually failed to take out the drawn liquidity, which was so this same high. You can see the S&P 500 did not meet the high. However, it did rally. However, the NASDAQ, which was the stronger asset, did end up taking the high. And you had a nice move of 190 points in relation to the move here with only 42 points on the S&P 500. So you can see that the stronger asset met the drawn liquidity. While both assets did move higher, the Nasdaq was stronger and did end up reaching that key level. So that's a high probability SMT. What's a low probability SMT? This is an example of a low probability SMT. So like we said earlier, our two things we're looking for is a bias and key level. Now this is Friday, June 7th, and you can see this SMT that I've marked out here. So again, I'm not going to cover bias in this video, but in this instance, if you look at the higher time frame, you would be bullish in this instance. Or we can just assume that the bias was bullish just for the example purposes. So we have established a bullish bias. However, we see a bearish SMT right here. So you can see the bearish SMT example, which is right here. One asset makes a higher high, the other one makes a lower high, which is showing willingness to go lower. So if we come back to the example, here's the lower high, here's the higher high. This asset is showing weakness, this one is showing strength. When you're looking for shorts, you want to take the weaker asset. So the first thing we have established a bias. However, this SMT is against our bias. And the second thing is there's no higher time frame key level. If you look at the chart, this is just the 15-minute time frame, but besides these highs, there's no higher time frame key level, for example, an order block, a fair value gap, or anything like that. So we have this SMT form, and you can see that this SMT failed to meet the drawn liquidity. And not only did it fail to meet the drawn liquidity, it also ended up taking out the high afterwards and then breaking the SMT. So if you were to trade this SMT, you most likely would have not found a really good trade. On top of that, the drawn liquidity was not met because we're not trading with a higher time frame key level, and the bias was bullish. So these two things really increase the probability of an SMT leading to a better trade. And that happened with both cases over here. So now that we talked about high probability and low probability SMT, we talked about what SMT looks like, how to identify it, and what we look for in a high probability SMT. I'm going to talk about mistakes I've made trading with SMT and the mistakes I see other traders make. Okay, so the main 4 mistakes, I listed them right here, but I'm just going to talk about them. The main one being using SMT to create a bias and not confirm a bias. Now, I cannot stress this enough. The amount of times I have just went on the charts and seen an SMT and been like, oh, we have SMT at the highs, I'm bearish. I personally think this is not the right way to use SMT because, for starters, if you have a predetermined bias, right, that will already give your trade idea a certain degree of probability, right? If you now have an SMT to confirm that bias, you just increase probability of that trade playing out. However, if you use SMT first, because there are so many SMTs being created, there's a good chance that your probability will not even increase. In fact, it will decrease when you're using SMT to create a bias, not to confirm one. So, for example, in this example right here, when you use the SMT here, let's say you saw this SMT at 10:45, you were like, oh, I'm going to be bearish during the lunch hour or during PM session, and you would have got stopped out because this SMT did not hold because the bias was never bearish to begin with, right? The second thing is not filtering high probability versus low probability SMT. Now, what really makes this high probability is, like we said earlier, it's number 1, bias, and number 2, key level. This is an example of a very high probability SMT. This is how you want to use your SMT on the higher time frame. On the lower time frame, right, it's fractal. So this is a 4-hour key level with a 1-hour SMT. I'm sure if you went to other time frames, this SMT would also exist. So keep that in mind. And then the last 2 things kind of overlap, which is not being patient for SMT and then over trading lower time frame SMT. So I've made mistake number 4 a lot, where I basically just see an SMT and I'm like, oh, this is time for reversal, this is time for going, and I would take the trade and I would just get stopped out. I don't know if anyone can relate to that, but I have made a lot of bad trades doing something like that, and now I've learned to only look for SMT that confirm my bias and SMT that occurs at a key level. Otherwise, I don't even care that the SMT exists unless those 2 criteria are met. And then the third thing is not being patient. So when I say not being patient is when you get to a certain mastery of these concepts, you'll begin to anticipate the formation of an SMT. And it's important to stay patient and wait for that bias to be confirmed or wait for that key level to be reached and the SMT to actually form. Because what happens is sometimes you'll have an SMT on the 1-minute time frame, but on the 15-minute time frame, that candle is still forming and there isn't actually an SMT there. So just because there's a divergence during the candle formation, you actually want to wait for the SMT to form into the key level and then show that it's holding before. So for example, if you have a candle forming SMT, wait for the close, wait for the next candle, maybe even the next couple candles before trading the SMT, because the higher time frame candles are still painting. So Okay, with that being said, that's pretty much everything I want to cover about SMT. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in Discord or in the comments below. The Discord link in my bio. Okay, with that being said, that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover about SMT. Hopefully, you guys can identify high probability versus low probability SMT and avoid some of the mistakes I've made. I always recommend to backtest everything I say or anything you ever see, because at the end of the day, it's all gonna matter how you implement it into your model. You can't just copy paste, in my opinion. So with that being said, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments or in my Discord, which the link will be in the description. I live stream every trading day, 9:15 a.m. EST. If you want to tune in, watch me improve my own trading, watch me work towards a payout with my funded accounts. So that being said, catch you guys in the next video. Peace.